I think that for us on the African continent, the impact of the financial crisis is obviously not transmitted from the credit crunch or the liquidity freezes, but it's more from the global recession that we have suffered. And I think it's a crisis, as Diane was saying, that it comes in multiple forms. And I think while it is a crisis, or it is an economic crisis, it's a social crisis for us. It's a governance crisis as well. It's a crisis of how we create wealth, how we distribute wealth, how we spend wealth. It's a crisis of how we relate to money. It's a crisis of capitalism and its violent models of development that have been with us for a long time and are finally exploding. And I think that what we have to be careful of in looking at it as a crisis of multitudes issues is to ensure that even as the G20 begins to debate this issue, and as Diane was saying, the importance of opening up the policy space for us to engage, is to ensure, I think the hardest battle around this is to ensure that the orthodoxies that got us into this position in the first place are not allowed to go back with the intensity that they have. And I think this is the hardest part of this battle. Also, I think that on the African continent, the crisis has really played itself out in different ways. Political unrest. We have seen the return of coup d'etats, Mauritania, attempts in Guinea-Conakry, attempts in Guinea-Bissau, Madagascar. And whether we can completely attribute this to the financial crisis, certainly the crisis creates a crisis of governance for many African countries, and this is something that is taking us backwards, actually, at a time when we had started to fix our government, started to really come to the party and begin to earn a lot on the democratic dividend. We've also seen strikes and rebellion, Somalia, Kenya, South Africa. We've had long-ranging strikes, the doctors' strikes, the mining strikes, the municipal workers' strikes. All of them, again, demanding wage increases. And as Diane has said, we have seen wages go down, and this has become a crisis for workers who are saying that we're suffering from inflation, we're suffering from high food prices, we're suffering from high energy prices, and we need more in order to survive during these times. Again, when we look at African economies, are predicted to lose 578 billion in export earnings, 18.4% of GDP. That's 5 times the amount of aid that we actually get to the region. So while we are losing out on the trade side, the aid side is not coming to the party to militate and mitigate against this crisis. And this, we're seeing the bigger countries which have done very well for the past couple years, Nigeria, Angola, South Africa, growing very rapidly, and all those gains because their primary commodity prices have plunged. Non-energy commodities by 38%, oil by 69%, creating a real budget crunch for the Nigerian government, for example, in terms of how are they going to make sure that the shrinking budget begins to spread. So the eyes on the budget and making sure that we have gender-responsive budgets becomes, again, a very important thing to mobilize around, and beginning to say that the cake needs to be divided in such a way that we do not lose social spending. Of course, Diane also talked about remittances that have dropped 5 to 8%. But we have to also remember that these remittances have been going to the poorest families on the African continent, who are going to lose significant amount of income, which means that cut down or change of children going to private schools, not going to public schools, and looking at some of these issues. Foreign direct investment has slowed to a trickle, hindering economies that have relied on these flows. Mozambique has had to discard a number of hydroelectric expansions. Their mining projects have had to be shelved and put on hold simply because they will not have the money coming in to be able to do this. And that's a lost opportunity in terms of creating work opportunities. GDP growth expected to slow to 4.6% in 2009. In Southern Africa, the region that I come from, will probably go even below 4.0. Angola will go from 20.9% in 2009 to 7.6%. These are people. This is a crisis of people. This is a crisis of livelihoods of people. This is a crisis that women have to manage. But also I think that it's important that when we look at Africa, we've moved from shock to shock, from the food crisis to the energy crisis, now this financial crisis. And we've not recovered from any of these crises before we had to deal with a new crisis. So the final consolidation of all these crises begins to create a very serious instability for the African continent itself. Just looking at the textile workers and looking at that, 100,000 new jobs came into the apparel market in 2006. 45,000 into Swaziland, 26,000 into Lesotho, 30,000 into Kenya. The financial crisis impact on textile industry, the food processing industry, the electronics jobs has literally wiped out these jobs. In South Africa, the last standing textile company, Frame, which has been there for generations, is on the verge of closure. And one of the things I think that is important also to say is the manner in which many African governments have slowly come to the realization that we have a crisis. And I remember that in South Africa, it took a long time for our own finance minister to admit that, oh my goodness, the economy has gone into recession, the private sector has borrowed beyond anything we ever dreamt of, and any dividends that we made from previous years were wiped out within weeks. And I think that the shock of just of what had happened began to really create, I think, a very important atmosphere that questioned, what does the developmental state mean in Africa? What is the role of the state when things like this happen? How do we bail out? Do we bail out? Who do we bail out? These are important questions. Is capitalism really the way in which we should go? Or should we be looking at a different discourse and a different ideological direction that will not place us in this particular position? These are the important debates, and I think that is the opportunity of this crisis, in the sense that it's giving us the opportunity to discuss the financial architecture, to discuss whether this financial architecture is positive or inimical to people's development, and whether we need a new paradigm and new alternatives to begin to stimulate the market. Finally, Chair, before you bring your love note, I think that what's important for us is, I think for me, the need for trade and economic literacy, very, very critical. The need for us to really understand and navigate the whole financial architecture and find entry points for women in terms of how we want it responded to. What are the things that we believe we need? And what values and what ethics can we bring back to the financial architecture of our country?